Today we are here with Jodi Hrbek. Jodi is a well-known author and writes a lot of cool content on LinkedIn for you to find. She runs many things, has done hundreds of different roles, I think, across the ecosystem. And really pleased to have Jodi here today to talk about the work she's been doing, the role of an admin, evangelizing that, and just some other cool stuff. So welcome, Jodi. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's really fun to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
No, and did I pronounce Hrbek properly? Like that's my.
You got it.
Yes, perfect. I had a colleague who I used to work with who had his surname was Polish and had Z, J, and C one after another, and like it took me months to like perfect it. And I have this thing where I refuse to have people's names mispronounced because I don't like it. I think it's my name's Paul. It's dead easy, but I don't like it to be mispronounced for other people. So yes. Welcome aboard. Thank you for coming again. And I wanted to start off by just, if you could just give us a little bit of a background about how you got started in Salesforce. I know, when I read about the author that you've been working with Salesforce for about 20 years now. So, you must have started like very young and really
right,
kicking off. So give us a bit of background about how you got started in Salesforce to get going with.
Yeah, I was thinking about it the other day, and I was thinking that I actually might be the ground zero accidental admin. I might be the first one. So yeah, I was actually a user of Salesforce somewhere around 2001 when there were about 3 objects. I was working for an internet company and had an opportunity to use it. I was running kind of our channel and alliance program. Very basic, right? Back then we were using it, in lieu of a shared Rolodex inside the organization and in lieu of rolling up spreadsheets to one another. And kind of the long and the short of it is I ended up inside an organization that had just been created, 3,000 people. They'd spun out of another company, but nobody knew who they were. And they needed to kind of get the word out. And they hired me to come help them essentially develop a sales infrastructure and do sales training. So, that's my background. I always say, I'm not a technologist. I'm an accidental technologist. But, prior to that, I had been doing sales and marketing. My very first job, my first corporate job, if you will. I worked for the Walt Disney Company, and I was in a sales role, and I taught cable companies how to sell our product. So we can circle back to this, but it starts connecting the dots of why I'm so passionate about asking questions and why I think sales training is so important for consultants. Is that's kind of where I started. So I find myself in this organization in this would have been 2002. Where I'm, training consultants how to sell. And I like to say we had so much success that we needed a place to, track our work. Cool. And lo and behold, I ended up recommending, hey, there's this thing I've used called Salesforce that I think could help us. We were a remote organization with, not remote in the sense of today, but lots of offices all over. And so I made the case to my boss. And, whereas today Salesforce is, the big one to beat, I had to work pretty hard to convince my boss it wasn't, 3 guys in a garage. And, truth be told,
still was.
It wasn't that far off, right?
Yeah.
So we ended up running, we implemented, we had, I think a total of, by the time we were done, of about 300 users, which made us one of the larger customers at the time. We started on professional, but ended up moving to enterprise, which they were just starting enterprise edition. And the story that I always like to tell, just because I think it drives home kind of where Salesforce was back then, was I did go to the very first Dreamforce. And my objective at that event, which was at a hotel, a very small hotel, right? It had humble beginnings. My objective was to meet with the product manager to explain why we so desperately needed an or statement, because back then, if you needed to report on this or that, you literally had to run 2 reports.
That's mad. Yeah, it's I I mean, I love the idea of trying to sell Salesforce as, it's not three guys in a garage, it's three guys in a condo that's somewhere on Mission
Right,
Hill.
in
It's
San
yeah,
Francisco.
yeah, they're not in a garage. Go. But it's it's funny. I think people forget that there are people who started off using the system when it was real old. I mean, I when we were chatting just before starting, I was saying about when I first started, and I remember um, a few years back, I the first time I felt like I had been in the ecosystem a long time, in air quotes long time, was when I was explaining to someone that what I remember when what is now called Classic was released as Aloha. And like it was a big thing when it was the Aloha edition, and you had Aloha apps and everything. The Salesforce Hawaiian branding goes deep, and I remember what was called Classic then, which is now probably called Classic or whatever it was. And so
Right, I remember that too. This is actually our third UI.
it
Everybody
is,
thinks
yeah.
it's the second. That's right.
So yeah, so it's funny when you go back to things like that. People are like, oh yeah, I can't believe anyone's ever. I spoke to an admin a while ago at a company, and they asked me like, um, they basically never used Classic. They came in post Lightning, and they're like, why? How did anyone ever use Classic? And I was like, oh, I remember when it was the new thing. Skeuomorphic design. That's cool. So you came in through that way, and when you say an internet company, just out of my own personal curiosity, do you mean a company that was like an ISP, or do you mean a company? Because in the 2000s, an internet company was like everything. So
Well, so prior to the one we're talking right now, where I first used Salesforce, I worked for a company that sold websites
oh
back
wow,
in.
yeah,
So yeah, I would say I had a seat at the at the table at the .com era. I was there for the .com boom and the .com bust. So I was selling websites back when people were trying to tell me that they didn't need one because they had a yellow page ad.
right.
And I'm pretty willing to bet that there's people listening to this going, "What's a yellow page ad?" But that was actually where I first used Salesforce in a capacity inside that organization. And then I moved to this other company, which was a technology consulting firm. They're still around today. And they're
Oh,
still using Salesforce today, as a matter of fact.
that's good to know. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's yes, yellow pages. Now there is a throwback. Like getting that, we used to in Britain. We used to get them through like they would send a physical book through the mail.
Oh yeah.
Like they were doing it until like I remember getting them into like my 20s and just being like, why are people still doing this? This isn't surely a thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously you started off kind of as an accidental admin, as many people do, and as many people do. One of the interesting things I think about Salesforce accidental admins, um, and this is an off the cuff pool thought here, so let's work with it and hold on to our hats. Is I did a lot of work historically in kind of like legacy IT organizations. There's lots of Microsoft everywhere, and Access and Excel spreadsheets everywhere. And most of the people that were accidental IT admins and managers were all accountants. Because it was kind of like Excel was obviously the thing that everyone got onto computers for because it made VisiCalc and all these things made doing accounting really easy. One of the things I think is really interesting about a lot of Salesforce admins and accidental admins in particular is that they're business users.
That's
And
right.
so it's a fascinating thing to think about, but how the use of the application has changed and how it's been driven from it being very, and apologies to any accountants, both current or recovering, that are listening to this right now, but the number of old systems I remember seeing that looked horrific, being frank, because it was very blocky and almost like tables everywhere. Whereas now I suppose there is a far bigger drive towards efficiency of things. And I wonder if that in particular for Salesforce is because of that.
Well, I think you hit on something really important, which is a lot of us in the early days, the reason that we could go in and do the work we needed to do to set up Salesforce is we were building the system we wanted to have, we needed to have. I was building the tools that I wanted my consultants who were actually salespeople to have at their fingertips, and the information that I wanted them to use to progress the sale or move a client relationship forward or identify white space or whatever it was. So I was building what I needed. And I think that's how many of us came into the ecosystem.
Mm.
Why I think it's so interesting, to be perfectly honest with you, is increasingly, as Salesforce has become more complex, the system is being run and built by people who are technologists that have never used it. So I think, certainly we're seeing a counterbalance to that. We're seeing the rise of the BA. We're seeing the rise of the product owner role. Those weren't there before. But it is interesting that this tool that I think became so successful because it was created by and for business users is increasingly moving and starting to feel more and more like any other part of the tech stack, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's. I was chatting to someone earlier on about how there's a lot of organizations I now see and have seen for a while, but that use Salesforce as, I'm going to say, as a platform, and that's going to sound like I'm just trying to get a marketing line here, but I mean truly as a platform where they're kind of getting rid of shadow IT and putting Salesforce in place because it is easy to build apps and host them and run them and all these things and not have to deal with the minutiae of SharePoint sites everywhere and things like that. And yeah, I know what you mean. I think the interesting counterbalance to that I think is still one of the drivers at Salesforce is that is different, I think, to other technology companies to a large extent, is that Salesforce are still very big users of Salesforce. And I think if you take I for my sins was at one point a Microsoft Dynamics certified person as well.
We'll forgive you.
Yeah, I know it was enforced upon me, but it was not long after. It was when Chatter was the big Salesforce feature, right? And Dynamics had just bought Yammer, if you remember that. And I remember sitting in this training session. The trainer, who was like the head of Dynamics for Europe or something, was like, has anyone got any familiarity with the CRM? And I was like, sort of affirmatively, yes. And oh great, what? And as soon as I said Salesforce, you just saw this like thunder descend. And half of it was just like, we've got that feature coming soon though. We've got that feature coming soon that is opening up 19 tabs. Because Dynamics used to open up a window for every single link you clicked.
Oh boy.
Rather than just, it was awful. But the reason what I was getting at behind that, and what I think you've hit on really well there, is that Salesforce, I think still a strength of Salesforce in general, is that they follow that phrase of eating their own dog food. Like their AEs and their SEs and all of the the CSMs, everyone you interact with at Salesforce through to the product managers and everyone in the back, all use Salesforce for everything. And so I think in general, one of the strengths they've got is that they will produce a better sales product because they are using it throughout the entire organization. Whereas I would love to go into Microsoft and see how many different CRMs and sales systems there are. Same with, I mean, Oracle probably solely use Oracle CRM, but like all of these other ones in there, it'd be so interesting to see that. But I do think that the conundrum with that platform push as they become a broader platform is you do need more generic technologies. So like identity and security and all those things. And you do end up with this push, but particularly.
Well, and I see that just even in terms of, the ecosystem and the people that I interact with. I always say somewhere along the way, the sales fell out of Salesforce in my feed. And by the way, I'm equally guilty of that. I for most of my career up until 5 years ago, I ran Salesforce teams, had other responsibilities in the sales operations space. And in the last 5 years, I've moved into a role where I report into a technology team. So I have also, lost some of that focus. But it used to be back in the day, you would go to Dreamforce and we were talking about sales and how to really leverage the tool to advance sales and close deals and increase deal value and all of these things. And that used to be, what you felt more camaraderie around. And now it's much more what I would say under the hood of Salesforce as opposed to the use case. And part of that is because depending on who you're talking to, right? Used to just be sales and then it was sales and service cloud, but you very well now could have somebody who is in the health cloud space or a manufacturing cloud space or doing things that are totally outside that domain. And a lot of those conversations, I think, that are domain specific, again, are happening more in product roles and business roles. And we're seeing the Salesforce kind of move to a technology discussion, a platform discussion, as you mentioned, as opposed to some of those subject matter expertise areas that I think we used to be a lot more focused on as an ecosystem.
Yeah, and it's interesting as an ecosystem as well. I think that there's so I was involved in a LinkedIn discussion the other day around which Pablo Gonzalez started around patterns in Apex, and I have had many a conversation with people on this, and this is a hill I will happily die upon. In that, I am in general against big sort of patterny framework. Like, I'm just going to say it, fflib. Never install it, never want it. I've worked for FF, I've seen it used in the wild in its biggest form. I will never use it. I don't like it. There are many things about it I have reasons for.
Wait, I have to be honest. I don't know what FF is.
Financial Force. So there's
okay.
fflib. Sorry,
I thought that's where you were heading, but all of a sudden I wanted to make sure.
So yeah, so fflib is an open source package that the team from Financial Force released around that has a lot of big architectural domain patterns in there, and lots of stuff. And I am anti it for many reasons. And I have used it. I've used it in many places. I was there when a lot of it was written at the start. I know where it's come from. I have a lot of experience in it. But as you see more and more technologists come in who are from other areas and other domains and are looking at Salesforce, and this is very sort of me being a bit Apex specific here, but looking at Apex and trying to be like, oh, it's like Java, let's do all these Java things. It's like it looks like Java, but don't try to use Salesforce as Salesforce is intended to be used. Develop and build and configure and customize Salesforce as Salesforce is intended to be. Don't try and make it fit this other thing because you've got this preconceived notion. And yeah, it is definitely I don't want to use the word attention because I don't think that there's great tensions in the ecosystem. There is great tensions in the ecosystem about many things, but I don't think it's a horrific war or anything. But it is interesting to just see, as you say, more people kind of coming from different areas with opinions, and they're not wrong. They're
Sure.
Their solutions will be great and will have things that are more positive than mine. But yeah, it's really, really interesting to see. And so kind of feeding back into that, where you mentioned about when you were at Sales or when you went to Dreamforce, the conversation used to be very much so. I remember every use case that Salesforce ever came out with in every release was as a salesperson, and then occasionally they'd add in a Service Cloud person, and then they'd just be quiet about it for a bit longer. But you worked at Salesforce for a while, didn't you? So I think you've got some extra kind of experience around being at the mothership, and eating. I'm going to eating the dog food from within the camera. So
drinking
that's
the
a
champagne.
horrific analogy and terminology.
Drinking the champagne.
But we'll go with it. So yeah. But being, what was that like then, and how did you enjoy that role or those roles?
So the way that I got there was kind of interesting. So in that kind of that first role where I was, I don't even know if we used the word platform manager back then, but where I kind of stood up Salesforce and ran it for some number of years, I think about 3 years. One of the things that we also did was we stood up a recruiting org built on the platform. And, in this day and age, that's kind of ho-hum, big deal. But, keeping in mind, it was 2003, it was a pretty interesting use case. And so what ended up happening is I ended up on several occasions getting asked to demo that for Salesforce's recruiting team, which was really up and coming and, still new and just starting to grow, and ultimately ended up getting recruited by them. So both myself and my admin, who again might have been like the very first admin ever, who's also still in the ecosystem all these years later, we still do some projects together sometimes. But he and I both ended up going over there. So it was a very different place, obviously, than where it is today. That was 2004 was when I was there. I was there for 4 years. I was in the role both of AE and CSM. And my focus, even in those roles, was always still on selling. As a CSM, my particular specialty was I would go to sales meetings with my clients and help to their sales leaders meetings. and, help them figure out how to integrate the tool into their management process, how to use it as a coaching tool. One of the things that I was really proud of that I did while I was there is I partnered with our learning and development team and created a training called "So You've Got a Dashboard, Now What?" Because what I believed and actually still continue to believe is we do collectively, the royal we, do a pretty good job training end users on how to leverage Salesforce, but oftentimes we forget about that first line sales manager, and really helping them understand how this can be a coaching tool and a tool that can do things besides just looking at their pipeline, but really provide actionable intelligence. And so that was really kind of my focus while I was there, was kind of beating that drum. But ultimately, what I missed was doing hands-on keyboard work and taking care of orgs and actually doing the work instead of just talking about it. So I ended up deciding to hang out my shingle as an independent consultant and did that for a number of years.
Yeah, I think you hit up on an interesting thing there about the training, because one of the things I having run sales for a number of organizations and done sales for a number of years, I am a terrible salesperson, because what I will often do is go to a client and I'll be like, great, we're at the end of this project, and there'll always be some eager beaver that's like, super, like I've got my Q3 goal is to implement this next thing. I'm like, no, stop. Like, go away and use that for 3 months, and all of you train the users, but train everyone as you say, and then in 3 months' time, come back and actually look at what you liked about it, because I think that there is a big thing that happens with organizations where you get to the end of a project, everyone gets really excited and goes live with it, and then you forget that there are certain users that haven't been trained properly or haven't been used to it, or are impacted and aren't aware. And it's only after 3 months of running with it that you can come back to them and say, okay, everyone, what was good? So you've got your dashboards, so you've got your reports. Now what? As you say, yeah. So I like that idea of training a broader group of people, and that. So the way you got in there as well, then you were saying you built this recruiting org as a demo app, and was that?
We were using it. It wasn't a demo org. Yeah, we actually were running our recruiting on it at the time.
Oh, well, that's cool.
We had two different orgs. We had a sales org and we had a recruiting org. And again, 2000, when that would have been 2003, it was kind of a big deal.
Yes, multi-org setups were never an easy thing, let alone way back then. So that's cool, because one of the things that I know you're involved in as well is it comes to talking about demoing it to the Salesforce sales team a lot and things like that, is the demo jams that you run. And I really like these. I think it's an really interesting idea, because one of the biggest problems, and I'll let you kind of fill in the full detail. One of the things that I think is interesting is that demoing, I think, is such an undervalued skill, and is a real gap in there. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what the demo jams are, how they work, what they do?
Sure. So we're jumping way ahead now. We're back here in 2023.
Yes, sorry, I guess. This is like a Tarantino movie. Like, you just start hopping around the timeline, and
that's right. I love it. So the demo jam was an idea that I came up with last year, because I kept getting the same question over and over and over from just different people in my network, different people reaching out to me, which was, what is the secret sauce? How do I break in? How do I get that first job? And I kept giving the same advice over and over, and wanted a place to, be able to go say it and have lots of people hear it, which is, you got to get hands-on keyboards. Like, at the end of the day, you can only study so much. You have to do the work. And the best way to do that and the best way to show that you understand the concepts is actually to build something. And it is a win for so many reasons for newcomers. It's how you have those aha moments of all those things you've been studying. But it's also, once you actually build an org, how you get to, show off not just your Salesforce chops, but, to your point, Paul, your other skills, your ability to tell a story, your ability to present, your ability to connect the dots and talk about, why you did something, not from a technical perspective, but what problem you were solving. So I really believed that this was a game changer, and still do. I think it's the number one way that people can break into the ecosystem. Um, and I just kind of woke up one morning and was like, hey, we should do a demo jam and like, let people actually, try this. And I had no idea what would happen. I had no idea if anybody would be willing. I had no idea what they would build. So we hosted the first one, I think, just about a year ago, last June, and had, give or take 8 contestants. They all had 5 minutes to, show us what they built. And it was amazing. First of all, I was blown away by what these so-called newcomers were able to do. And it really changes your mindset around, the value that somebody without actual experience can bring to the team, because they have a lot of other experience, not to mention a lot of these people are just putting in so much time to learn, all sorts of parts of the platform. And in some instances, by the way, things that practitioners haven't had time to learn yet. So, newcomers are coming in with some skills and, hands-on keyboard experience with things that like some things I'm literally having to say now, like, wait, what is that?
Oh, yeah.
Walk me through. What am I looking at here? But it just really turned out to be a really inspiring and fun event. Maybe the thing I've had the most fun doing in all of these years that I've been in the ecosystem. And we've since run, I think, a total of 5. And the really fun part is after the first one, all of the ones we've had since, we've had other demo jammers or just people that weren't in the jam, but come in and also talk about their success stories that they've had in using this demo or concept to, land an interview, nail the interview, land the job, and, really, if nothing else, just show up with that. I call it the Jagger swagger, with that confidence, because, they know what they're capable of doing, and they're able to prove it.
That's really cool. I love the idea, because I think the 2 things that that really stick out to me about that is one is that request of how do I break into the ecosystem, and I when I did the review of Pay's book, Salesforce Discovery book, and in that one of the things I said about in that book was, and that she hits on really well, is when you're asking for like mentorship or advice or assistance, and this is this is the moment in the podcast where Paul at least is going to sound like he's some sort of a grandiose person talking out of his backside for a second. But when you get a lot of requests for mentorship, or I mean, in my LinkedIn inbox, I'm sure it's the same in yours. Every day, I get about 10 offers for developers and outsourced consultants from around the world, and do I need staff augmentation? And then I get a bunch of people who are sending me messages saying, how do I get started? How do I break in? How do I do this? And it's such a difficult thing to give an answer to, because you only know from your own experience, which, do you know what? I can't tell them go back to 2010 and start learning it then. Like, that's of no use. And I think having a specific ask is really, really important. If you reach out to me with a specific ask about, can you help me with this thing, I will be far more inclined to respond and help you than if you're just like, can you help me get a job? Like it's a nigh on impossible request. And so I think the idea of having something like this, though, where there's a concrete path where, Joe, if someone says, look, I'm going to do this demo jam, can you help me with this part of it, or how to do this? Yeah, Joe, I think it's a really, really good concrete thing, and can help out massively there. And as you say with demoing, that telling a story is key. Like I mean, if anyone's ever gone, you must have gone through like the, what's the SDO training and things like that Salesforce do many, many years ago. Like, and they do all this sort of training about telling stories, but there's that part of a demo is the key part for a customer. Saying it as a consultant for a customer, saying it as an app provider for a customer, saying it as someone who's been an admin for the end user. Telling that story properly is key. And as a little kind of amusing tale, there's one company I worked with where we did every demo we did on a project, we were given a budget for props.
Nice.
And so the management, like they would give you a budget for props, and the only reason you were not allowed to spend that budget was if you had previously spent it like elsewhere on other props. So like, and it was you turn up and we were doing a lot of medical stuff, so it'd be like, it was, someone would play the roles of a patient and a doctor, and I would sit there in the middle of a meeting room with all these kind of people that have spent hard-earned cash on you, sort of wearing a doctor's coat and with a stethoscope, and having to play these roles and go through it. And it was great because it got a laugh, but it really meant that people understand the personas and get what they're going through, because just talking through a system diagram is really, really, really dull and boring.
Well, and I think it's part of the reason for newcomers that having that demo and offering to show it as many times as you can, because sometimes they're not going to take you on the first bite. But it gives you an opportunity, particularly people who have those skills, to really stand out. And by the way, in some instances, people are looking for roles that maybe need less technical skills and need more of that. I mean, it's the interesting thing about the ecosystem is there's such a variety of roles, and we're challenged because we lump them all into a couple of buckets, right? Admin, developer. Now we're starting to see this admin developer, whatever you call it, and the rise of a BA. But that doesn't really do justice to the breadth of skill sets that individual companies are looking for. And so, I'm bullish on if you have those skill sets where you know how to effectively communicate and ask questions and present, like, do it, because A, that might be what they need, or B, you could be a double whammy, right? It's a twofer. You're showing off your tech skills and your soft skills. And that's really what, is what everybody needs.
Oh yeah. And I'd even go as far to say that I think the biggest successes I've had in any role I've done have been because I've worked to be able to communicate a technical idea. And that's what any build is. It doesn't matter if your build is changing a page layout and adding a new custom object. That's still technical work you've done. But taking that idea and communicating it to a user who has no idea what you're on about. I was a conversation I was having earlier where the chap I was talking to, we were talking about AI and models and all sorts of nonsense, but he was saying about just the concept of, if you and I were sat here now and I said to you, all right, so I've got this table. Now your first thought, Jodi, is probably going to be, he means an object. He's probably going to start saying, I've got this table called like accounts because I'm creating a custom object called account because I'm a madman. But doing something like that. So I've got this, but when I say table, you'll get that I mean object. And then, but if we were in a room and I was stood next to a table, I'd say, I've got this table. But having that ability to take the kind of technicalities of, I've got this table, I've got this object, and do that translation, just bear it down to just say, look, here's a list of this thing. I've got this thing, and going through it, I think is a huge, huge, huge part of being successful. And business, I think people forget that, and this is a top tip for everyone, is that doesn't matter what someone's job title is, like whether they're CEO, CXO, or whatever, like, or VP of something, is they are just another human. And more importantly, the further up that chain you go, the less likely you are to know the detail. Like I will almost bet that Mark Benioff knows less about how to use like Salesforce and Sales Cloud than 95% of the admins out there, even if they've not done a Sales Cloud implementation. But that's not, not because Mark's lazy and not doing his job. Don't fire me, Mark. Don't come at me. Please don't remove me from the ecosystem. Black mark me somewhere in Salesforce now. But like, because he's not using it. He's the CEO. He doesn't need to know that. And that's that. But having that skill to communicate a difficult concept is going to really kind of pay dividends.
Well, and not to bring it back to my book, but I mean, honestly, right, that really was what a big part of what I was trying to convey when I wrote my book is, we might be technical, I mean, we might be working on, quote unquote software, but at the end of the day, our job, if we want to be effective, is to understand the business, talk about business issues, and solve business issues. And so that was really, the message that I was trying to convey when I wrote that.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful segue into the book, which for those who are watching rather than listening, you'll see it just behind Jodi's head, who can probably just wave and it's up there, or there is a well-thumbed copy and well-noted copy here. So for those who haven't seen the video, the other video, I did a review of Jodi's book a while ago. That was how Jodi and I got connected. We had not spoken before. I think we'd spoken via LinkedIn when I'd commented that I'd done Pay's book and yours was next. I think that was
That's
probably the
right.
first.
I had to get a little sweaty and nervous.
And so for those who haven't seen that, go and watch it. It's the book review's out. It's a fantastic book. I would highly recommend people go and get the book. It is, it is one of the best things I've read around the ecosystem for sure. And one of the things that I really like about the book, and I think kind of feeds back to your motivation about writing it, is that there's this duality you have in this book. So the book is separated into two sections: creating a raving fan base, or create value in a raving fan base. I'm trying not to use the terms from another book, which is very similar, which is super fans. So creating value in a raving fan base, and then the second part is calming the chaos. And to give Paul's terrible 2-second synopsis of both sections before we let Jodi kind of tell me where I've got it wrong, is that the first part really focuses on that, on taking ownership. It's your org, it's your business that you're working in, and this applies to whether you're, I will say this applies to whether you're an internal admin or a consultant or a developer or whatever. Owning your work and doing such a good job that, and going above and beyond a little bit, so that people love the work you're doing and rave about you. And then the second part is kind of not counter to that, but balances that off nicely by saying, okay, well, you can do all of these things to make sure that everyone loves you, but don't go taking too much on and burning yourself out, because there will be a bunch of chaos. And I know from my own experiences in some of the projects I've done, I almost did that much of this thing, kind of going above and beyond and saying, oh, I can help you solve that, I can help you solve that. There was during COVID, when we weren't allowed out here, there was a period where, I remember working sort of like a 90-hour week, like between work and then like doing some, writing my own books and things like that. Saying yes to things can lead you the way. So tell us a little bit more about, when you started writing the book, why you started writing the book, and and have I done a fair synopsis?
You did very well on the synopsis, so thank you, and thank you for that awesome review. I really appreciated that. So I started the book in 2019. So I had just come out of a period of major burnout. I had left my job basically with no voice laryngitis, because I'd been basically completed a decommissioning of a legacy system with far fewer resources than the project entailed. And it was a great success on paper, but for me it was not. I was burned out, I was crispy, I literally just couldn't imagine doing anything Salesforce related, work related, and ended up quitting and taking a month or so off. And so in that time period, it started with me thinking about, I'd like to write down some lessons learned. What should I have done different that would have been more successful for me, for my team? And then, of course, just generally, I started, thinking about, even then, I'd been doing this longer than most people, and thought, there's probably some advice that I can give to shorten other people's learning curves. And I really had two different people in mind when I wrote the book. One was, I knew there were a lot of people that I had, either hired directly or that, I knew through, different parts of my work who were newer and really wanted to knock it out of the ballpark, but didn't know what that meant. What did that mean beyond the things they learned on Trailhead, profiles and roles and adding a field? That there is so much more to the job, but you don't necessarily know what that is if you've never done it, particularly if somebody's in a role where they don't have a team to look up to and use as role models to see what those things look like. There are people that, are solo admins that don't even work for practitioners of Salesforce. Mm-hmm. And so there was a part of me that wrote the book for that person to say, you've got the chops, you've got the skills that you learn, the hands-on keyboard. Let me just give you a couple different ways, different perspective, different thoughts about how you apply those to really add value. So that was one. The other persona, though, was the person that I have been, the person that I had on my team, which is exactly what you described. We were there. Yes, I can do that. I could do that. I think Salesforce admins, by definition, were people pleasers. We the reason that we love to say yes is it's fun. Like that's one of the things that I don't think people talk enough about in this job. It's like, it is fun to get a problem, to hear a problem, to know that you can solve it, to, put a little hands on keyboards and say, hey, let me show you something. Is this kind of, how would this help you? And their eyes light up. It's like, that's why we do this work, right? It's fun. And so we're always wanting to do more and help more and, right? But it also is what leads to the burnout. I've on more than one occasion seen my team, just pull personal heroics to get things done with far too few resources. And so I felt very strongly when I put this book together that I had to counterbalance it. So I'm glad you used that word. That's exactly what I was thinking, that if I'm going to teach people how to over deliver, which is what the first half of the book is, I darn well better, help them put business boundaries in place to ensure that they can do that without overwhelm. So that was really the intent. But the beauty is, I think they're very symbiotic, because the more value that you deliver, the more wins you put on the board, the more that you essentially earn what I call the proverbial street cred, right? Where you get to push back a little bit and you get to implement process and you get to say, yes, but not now, or let's do it in a different order, or whatever it is. You start, earning the right and the respect to do some of those things. And the more you do some of those things, the processes, the procedures, if you will, the more time that you have to add value. So I love the concept of how these two things work together, because, the more successful you are on the one side over time, if you're intentional, the more success you have on the other as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so to dive a little bit more into, because as I say, I love the book, and being really, really frank, there's when I started reading the book, because it says Salesforce Admin on the front, this is very, very honest of me. I was like, I'm going to look forward to reading this, but like, I've done architecting for like $1 million projects. I've done all this. I've written my own books. I was expecting to read through it and get some stuff out of it, but nowhere near the level I got. And like it, I really cannot say how much I enjoyed the book and how much I learned from it, and how useful it was for me to remind me to, sort of to ensure that I'm constantly checking myself and making sure as well. So one of the things that I found, so to dive into the first section a little bit more detail on some of the things, is one of the things that really, I think, resonated in what you just said was that that idea of kind of showing up and what that means. So I used to work for with an American chap whose sales pitch was like, look, if you go with insert large outsourced or GSI partner's name here, you're going to get the infantry, and they're really, really good at like, maintaining things, answering support tickets, like, invading and keeping things calm. We're like, and I think it was the Marines or the SEALs was what he used. He's like, we're the guys. He said, rather than you having 10,000 of us, there'll be 7 of us. We'll come in, we'll do the job, and we'll be out. And it was, that was kind of his thing about it. And I remember that organization had this real thing about, showing up and doing, But it struck me as you were saying that I don't think anyone's ever kind of sat there and said to me, at least, what showing up means, or what, being the grade A means, or, being whatever means. No one really distills that, because it's a hard thing to distill. And it's also, I think it's a very hard thing, because a lot of the time with that sort of stuff, there's a permission versus forgiveness problem. And, to go above and beyond in your work sometimes requires you to do things sometimes that you're not asked to do, in a way that, like, you're not going to tick people off effectively. And I think that there's, I've always been far, you could go and check with my wife and my parents on this, but I'm definitely a ask for forgiveness and not permission kind of guy. Much to my wife's chagrin, at least. But I think that there is a big part of that. So when you, in this first part where we're talking about creating that fan base and doing that, could you give some examples of like some of the key things that are like little wins that are going to make you have those fans that aren't working a 19-hour day every day or something?
Sure. Yeah. And I would, you know, I'm going to just tie back for a minute on this concept of ownership and ownership mindset. And one
Yep.
of the things that that's the word I use specifically. And I always say, that doesn't mean that you take over things that aren't your place,
Mm.
right? So I'm glad you brought that up. What it means is whatever you are responsible for, whatever your slice is. And for some people, that's the whole org, their
Mhm.
solo admin. For some people, it's this little aspect of support or this little module or, you know, whatever it is. But it means whatever part is your responsibility that, you know, you are showing up every day saying, I'm not just doing what people have asked me to do. I am burning brain cells thinking about what can I do to make it better? What are the problems that people don't even know they have that I can
Yeah.
address? How can I really ensure that from an organization's perspective that we're maximizing our spend as it pertains to, again, whatever my piece of the world is.
Yeah.
But what's been interesting to me, just in terms of how you do this, I think one of the biggest surprises that I've had since I wrote the book is um, the part that, to me, I guess I would almost say I probably took for granted. So one of the very early chapters is probe to find out what they really need. It's all about asking questions and
Hmm.
wearing that BA hat. I always say we have to get comfortable that in this role, our constituents can't always get what they want, right? So we summon our inner Mick Jagger, and we know
Hmm.
that if we do our job right, they get what they need. And my partner is very glad I'm not singing it. She's like, please don't sing that in public again. It's so embarrassing. But I do on occasion. But in any case, what has surprised me, I think, is how many people have told me that they didn't realize that was part of the role. And I had, you know, somebody said to me after they read the book, said, Jodi, I had no idea that I could, let alone that I should ask questions. And
Mm.
to me, that gets to the heart of ownership mindset and gets to the heart of, you know, why I say it doesn't matter what your role is, admin, whatever, we're all consultants, right? That part of our job is to figure out when somebody's talking to us about the system, even if it's a report request, even if it's troubleshooting, our goal always needs to figure out, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And only then do we answer the question or do any hands-on keyboard work or suggest a different solution. And so what's been interesting to me since I wrote that is that just that, what, again, I take it for granted. I grew up in sales. I grew up
Yeah.
training salespeople, which is the reason that I think that, you know, sales training is the best training that any consultant or Salesforce admin can get, because it's all about, hey, we don't pitch a thing until we understand what problem we're solving. And salespeople are brilliant at not only figuring out what problem, but what's that problem worth before they're
Yes.
actually presenting and closing. And I think we could all take a lot of lessons from that. But to me, again, that is one of the most powerful things that we can do. And I'm hopeful that, you know, some people have picked up on that, because to me, I really think, without having to go, you know, back to Trailhead and learn a bunch of things, it's the one thing that immediately can improve the quality of deliverables, is if we all just get even just incrementally better at asking better questions and being more thoughtful about that front end of, do we understand what we're solving and why and what's it worth. I think even if we learned nothing else about the platform, we would all have better Salesforce solutions that we take to the table.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I really like the way you kind of presented that, both in the book and just there, because I think one of the things that popped in my head was uh, someone someone once told me on a project I was on. So I was working on I was in charge of the Salesforce slice of a large integration where a large enterprise architecture where there was about 6 or 7 systems, one being decommissioned and replaced by Salesforce, and all these other things coming in. Um, and I remember the sort of having a sit down with the incumbent enterprise architect who was handing over to me to be the new enterprise architect as more was on Salesforce. And we've been working together for a while, and he was also a, a number of years older than me. I'm not going to be rude about him, but he was sort of happily winding down at the end of his career, and I remember kind of one of the things him saying to me that was interesting was that to not lose a sense of justice. And I remember, like, and I said to him, what do you mean? Like, he was like, he said, because every time you're on a call, he said, you ask questions about what's happening. He said, and if there's he said, even if it's not your solution, he said, but you can see that there's something that they're doing wrong or that could be done better. He said, you get so annoyed about it and you want to help them fix it. And he was like, and yeah, it was an interesting bit of advice because it was just a case of, well, don't lose that because it had helped find some problems, and it is just being nosy or inquisitive and asking those questions and taking ownership of, even though it wasn't my part of the solution, like, well, can we make that better if I do something here? Can I help you over there? But his other equal part, which ties in nicely with the second part of the book, is do that, but know that the justice system isn't perfect, as it were. Like bad guys get off all the time, and you can't fix every problem. And it's interesting you saying about burnout there, because I can say personally I've had multiple situations where I've needed to go away and just have that kind of decompression and take some time. And I think perhaps it's something that a lot of people out there don't perhaps realize happens more than people think, and particularly more. It's people like yourself and myself who are out there actively posting on LinkedIn all the time, or talking at events and saying yes and doing all these things. The reason we're doing that is also because we've known our own limits from having perhaps gone too far before.
Well, I'm really glad you said that, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just for me, that's one of the most important things that I tell people all the time is the reason that I'm out posting on LinkedIn every day, and I'm very upfront about it. I have a not so hidden agenda. I have a book that I'm marketing, but I also wasn't on LinkedIn for 19 years of my Salesforce career. I was barely at Ohana events for probably 10 of those years because I was busy working. And it's not to say one's right or not right. It's simply to say, like, don't look at people like us as the example and feel like you should be on LinkedIn more. That, it is a hard job to be a Salesforce professional, a practitioner in any role. Like I would say hands down, I think we're the luckiest because there's no better job. There's no better ecosystem. I mean, it's a high demand job, but it is also one of the hardest. And it is a job where you cannot rest on your laurels. On any given time, there is more that we could be learning, should be learning about the client, the platform, what's new, what's coming, all of the above. And so I just feel so strongly, and that's why I always tell everybody, like, please don't look at my LinkedIn post and feel like that is where it should be. There's a season for everything. I call it Ohana overwhelm. I want to make sure that everybody, is aware that that's a real thing. I worry that the Salesforce ecosystem is probably more prone to burnout than a lot of other careers because there is such a feeling of what else you should be doing. I should go to all the events. I should speak at all the events. I should go to all the Saturdays. I should. And at the end of the day, like, it is all about being here to have a successful career so that you can take care of yourself, your family, whatever that is. And, lean in, but lean out when you want to as well. That there is this, there is no what should be happening. It's you figure out where you are and what's your season.
Yeah, completely. And I think that there is I think there's an interesting thing that people forget, that you only get so you and I are both out there posting as two example people. I've been doing Salesforce now for about 13, 14 years. You've been doing it for about, what, 20, 25 years? Something like you don't get 10 years experience except after 10 years. You don't like that. And so, like, the ability to spend time posting about this is what I've learned after 10 years, or like knowing where to post and what you're doing, that comes of like you can't come online straight away and be like, and I don't want to use the term influencer because it's a bit of a loaded term, I feel, but you can't, for want of a phrase, you can't do that straight away. You can't go and speak at all the events when you don't have the ability. When you're in a junior admin role, you're not going to have the budget, the time off. I've not been to the last community event I went to was London's Calling. The next community event I go to will be London's Calling. I plan on doing a few more maybe later this year or next year, but I needed I had a rough period where I was sort of made redundant and was building my own business up. I didn't have time. I was paying it off my own back. I couldn't go and spend $1,000 here, there, and everywhere. can't spend a few thousand at Dreamforce. You have to be, cut your cloth to where it is. And I think you cover that really, that whole section of the second section of the book, that calm the chaos, really deals with that really well. As well as kind of the other thing I really liked about it is that tying it together. So things like in the first section of the book, for example, you talked about having an objects object where you write down what each object's for, why you're using, sort of, what you might refer to as in other areas might be called like an architecture decision record, an ADR in Confluence or somewhere, but same sort of things like that. But then in the second half of the book, you tie that back nicely, be like, well, look, those things you can do that show real value. Here's how you can use them to calm the chaos by tying together, here's your requirements, here's how it goes on there, what changes are being made. So I really enjoyed that as well. And I think that having that understanding that one complements the other is a big thing to help you manage that properly.
Yeah, and the other piece that was important to me, it was kind of like there are some processes and procedures, right? There are some actual things that can help calm the chaos depending on, what's going on. Certainly something as simple as having a ticketing system so that people aren't, stopping you in the hallway and, giving you orders that you're having to, write down, or the virtual hallway as it may be these days. Yeah. But then there was also the last chapter was things you can stop to have the chaos count drop. And I also wanted to be really honest about, what are the things where I like to say we're culpable of our own busyness. And I know that, my own personal Achilles heel is I'm horrible about giving estimates. They're never long enough. Yeah. And I happen to think that consultants are a lot better at that. You're trained to do it. You're trained to account for every minute of time that's going to be spent on client work and make sure that you bill for it. But in-house, we often just don't think about all those things, and we're not required to account for our time like that. And so, in lieu of being very deterministic about it, we can think about, oh yeah, that's easy, without thinking about all of the different things that, actually go involved with the solution, be that we're waiting for an answer, be that hair on fire things that come up, be it, what I call the Salesforce gotchas, right? It would be easy, except for I hit that one system limit. And so then I had to do this thing. And then instead I had to do this thing and so I wanted to put that chapter in there as well, just so that everybody also felt like, we do have some control over this. I think we have a lot more agency in our time and how we spend it than we probably give ourselves credit for, but it does take some work. And, we have to be deliberate about guarding our time as our most professional or valuable professional asset.
Yeah, I think the thing you hit on there about consultants with estimating and admins with estimating, one of the big drivers I think behind that as well is I've found whenever I've been working on an internal project or as an admin internally on something, the person I'm working with, or when I was internal, I used to work as an internal IT and developer before Salesforce, and the people who I was helping were sat at the desk next to me, or like, I could go like that and I could see them across the sea of cubicles. And it was very easy for me to see that, but also for people to understand if you're busy and what's going on. And there also is, I don't want to say the feeling of, I feel like there was always less pressure around it because it was a case of, okay, I need that doing, when can you, I'll try and get to it this week, but I've got this other thing. And because they can directly see people, and truth be told, because they're not paying for you, where as a consultant, right, very often consultants might be on 2 or 3 projects, and you've got, someone's being charged out let's say a nice round number of like, £500 or $500 a day, which is a very low rate for most places, is a low rate nowadays, especially, in the past few years. And if you're paying $100 an hour for someone, you expect a response like that, or you expect to say, I need this done. And if they go, oh, well, I've got this other thing, I remember just having conversations with clients, and still have them occasionally where it's like, well, look, I've got this thing going on for this client next week. I can't deal with you. And there's always this slight offense people take of like, but don't you love me? Am I not your favorite? It's like, well, yes, but they're also paying me. And I think internally you don't have that sometimes. Yeah.
And it's funny, people often ask me if my book is equally relevant for, other roles like consultants. And, thank you for, as somebody who's not my target audience, saying yes.
Yeah.
The reason that I did at least want to indicate that I wrote it for the in-house admin is the general principles are the same, right? How we show up, how we add value. Where there are some slight nuances is we negotiate exactly what you're saying a little bit differently with internal stakeholders who are not paid clients. And the book talks about things like trade-offs. Well, if you're in a paid client engagement, it's called a statement of work. You get more money, you get more resources. That's a different conversation than, what I was really focused on. So I think there's probably a few places where, it's not exactly like for like, but hopefully enough of the underlying principles are the same and are relevant from that perspective.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And on your payment point, I used to tell, whenever I walked into a meeting, I would say to people, everything's possible. Right. Just whether or not you've got a big enough checkbook for it, It's
right. Exactly.
So no, completely. So so with the book, then I know you've recently released the audiobook edition, which I'm going to say I was surprised about. When I saw it pop up with an audiobook, I was like, oh, that's surprising. And I thought, no, it's not, because yours, with a lot of Salesforce books. So when I think about an audiobook, my immediate thought is my own book, because obviously I'm extremely self-censored by this. But but when I think of Salesforce books, really honestly, when I think of Salesforce books, it's hard for me not to think of my own book, because I wrote 2 books for Salesforce. I can tell you that I won't be really sorry. This is a spoiler. Breaking news. There will not be audiobook versions of mine, unless anyone really wants to hear me sit and talk code over a microphone for reading out. But yours would work, and I'm sure does work really well with it. So you've just released the audiobook version. How did that come about? Is there a second edition coming soon as well, or
so I did release the audio version. I'm super excited about it. I narrated it myself. And it took, I don't know why, it's been almost 2 years since the book came out. So it took a lot longer than I'd planned. Part of that is on any given day, I am hoarse. It goes back to my story of, why when I lost my voice, I never fully got it back. Also because I live in a house with 4 dogs, and at any given moment, somebody is usually letting me know they're hungry or need to go out. So finding quiet in my house to record that book just kind of always seemed daunting to me. But I had so many people asking me about it that I finally just decided to hunker down over the holidays at the end of the year and lock myself in a closet and got it knocked out. So I'm very excited about that. And to your point, I think it works really well as an audiobook because I tried intentionally to not include hands-on keyboards. Certainly, I wouldn't write code because I don't code. But there are no how-to instructions in that book. It is a book about business processes and approaches. And so, toward that end, you asked if there was going to be a second volume. I'm about a week away from putting out I'm going to call it my second version. It's not even my second edition. I literally only changed a few typos and things that over the last couple of years, I didn't even want to make any changes that would impact page numbers. I just decided either I was going to do a whole big different book or leave it exactly as is. And so I was very proud at how well I had done about intentionally not talking about product so it could be evergreen. That was really one of the things that I had intended when I wrote it. Although I started in 2019, I published it in 2022, right when Process Builder and Workflow got officially declared, on the chopping block. So I did have to go do some find and replace right before I hit publish on it the first time. What's interesting to me is of all the things that have changed the most since I started writing that book is not the technology, it's the role of the admin. And it's the reason that as opposed to doing a second version, if I was going to do another book, I would probably talk more about how the role has diverged and how, I wrote this book in 2019 with the admin that I knew at the time, which were still embedded in the business side of the house. That is an increasingly rare occurrence. There's still plenty of them. There's so many admins that I would never say that's going away. But, there are so many admins now that are working in technology, doing sprints that have, a completely different process than the admins that report into an SVP of sales or marketing and, are working kind of as part of the business team. And so I think if I were going to do something different today, I would want to address how that has changed. I don't think it changes anything in the book. I still think even if you are what I call a back of the house admin, even if you have a BA or product owner that is actually the person who's the liaison to the stakeholder, it's still your responsibility to ask questions, make sure you understand the why, make sure you understand, how does this fit into the business objectives? It just means that you may be posing those questions to somebody other than the stakeholder. You may need to hold your BA or your product owner accountable for getting you that information.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. No, it's I think that the one of the things that the book does well is avoiding those specific terminology or pieces of things that are liable to change with Salesforce. And I think the audiobook will be I'm sure it is fantastic. And if you're listening to this as the podcast, I would recommend giving the audiobook a try. Jodi and I were talking before we started about missing having some drive. I used to have to drive to work many jobs ago, and the amount of podcasts and audiobooks I got through was tremendous. And so it's a good one I would say that this book I think will be a good one on audio, as it picks up some of the ideas as you go through to kind of have your brain firing off. And as an amusing little side tale, you mentioned the words evergreen and content. For the second edition of my second book, which came out earlier this year, I'd added in and was discussing with the Salesforce team, to be clear, Salesforce functions. I had an entire chapter written about Salesforce functions.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks before the end of like me writing and it being published, they canned it. Like just the public, like functions is being discontinued announcement. And so so there's me just sort of furiously being like, having to. So I have a completely unpublished chapter of my book on Salesforce functions that someone pointed out to me the other day. There was still a typo in the book because I'd not found it everywhere, where it said like, and we'll be talking about Salesforce functions. And they were like, it's not in there. And I was like, no, it was a last minute sort of,
Well, I can tell you, even when I wrote the book, I'd been doing this long enough to have, a bookshelf full of, Salesforce books that, reference things that are now called something different. So there's a reason I was very intentional when I did that, was saying, I want this book to be able to stand the test of time. And because it is about concepts, not technology, there's no reason that it shouldn't be able to.
No, definitely. So what's so we've got the audiobook out now. So and you're releasing the kind of slightly updated version. Should we call it version 1.5?
Nobody will even know that's different. Hopefully, I'm just sneaking in a few things that I was like, I should probably. There's only a handful of typos.
That's okay. I'll make sure. I'll buy a copy and just be sat there word for word check it. But so what's next for Jodi then? Because obviously, as you say, you're very active on LinkedIn, promoting the role of an admin and how people can better both deliver for their end users, but also manage their time. So what are you working on next? What's kind of coming up?
So I'm very excited. Actually, I have 2 things in the works. One, probably by the time this actually goes live, it will have launched. I am launching a audio course that's a follow-up to the book. Mm-hmm. It is called Listen Up, Salesforce Admins. And it is about 5 hours of content, really just relating to the topics in the book. So there's 5 episodes that are specific to talk tracks. Those are something that I included in my book that are like scripts of let's hear how that might sound. And that was one of the things that I've probably gotten the most positive feedback on. And so there were some just questions and scenarios that I wanted an opportunity to go in a little bit more depth. And then I include some episodes that are specific to some just tactical ideas, tools and things that I've used in the course of my work or managing my team. And then some episodes that address some of the frequently asked career questions that I get. So Listen Up, Salesforce Admins is essentially kind of, if you can think about it as an extension of a lot of the same ideas in the book. I decided that audio right now, again, because I've gotten so much feedback about people wanting it for the book, and because so much of what I do is conversations and questions, it felt like that might be a good opportunity. And apparently, once I got in front of the mic 2 years later in that closet, I just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
So I was like, wait, I've got more to say. Hold on a minute. So that is coming out June 1st. And the other thing that I'm working on that will be coming out later this summer that I'm also very excited about, I haven't even talked about it publicly yet, is a course, which is on Salesforce data model discovery, what to ask and why it matters. And my belief, well, of course, everybody, if you're spending time with me, you know that I'm, very focused on always be asking. But I believe increasingly, as we are starting to see more roles that we've talked about, kind of this BA and this product, people that don't do hands-on keyboards, I think it's important that they still have a really deep understanding of some of the core things relating to the platform, not the least of which, of course, is data models. That is, fundamentally something that we wrestle with all the time, even on, the most simple, hey, can you add a few fields, like that request that we all get all the time. We don't think about it as actually a data model decision, but it is one where we're going to put the fields, and is it really fields, or is it really something we need to track in a one-to-many or many-to-many or something like that. So I'm very excited about that course. I ran a small beta at the beginning of the year, and then based on that feedback, I'm making some tweaks, and I'll be actually taking that out hopefully to a group later this summer, and then launching that bigger once I get some feedback on V2.
Oh, that sounds cool. Well, that's very exciting. So there you go. We got an exclusive announcement on that. So I think this episode will be out in probably about 2 weeks from the time of recording. So yeah, you'll have been out for a week or so, and we'll have links to everything in the show notes, so you can go along and check all that stuff out that Jodi's doing. So to wrap it up then, Jodi, because we've kind of gone through a lot of different topics today, starting out how you got involved, and talking about the wonders of being an accidental admin. We had a lovely discussion as well about, I think, how the ecosystem's changing, how those roles are changing, and managing things. So one of the things I like to ask every guest is if they had, I'm going to say one tip, but Inez immediately on our first episode took it over one tip, so we can't limit everyone else to one now. But if you had a tip for people who are listening, relating to the work they're doing that isn't necessarily a Salesforce specific thing, what would that be?
Well, it's not gonna come as any surprise to anyone who's ever spent any time with me online, right? It's my hashtag always be asking. And we talked about it a couple of times throughout the course of this, but I do believe, you talked about the hill that you die on. This is the hill that I would die on. Yep. I believe that the number one way to improve the quality of your deliverables is to improve the quality of your questions. And so I like to say, ask better questions, ask questions better, and then of course you still got to nail the data model.
Yes, perfect. No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jodi. I've really enjoyed this chat. Thank you so much for coming along. As I mentioned, for everyone, there'll be links to Jodi's books and the audiobook, the new audio course, the new course, and everything else in the description below. If you've enjoyed this, if you're watching along, please leave a comment. If you've enjoyed it, if you have any questions, or if you have anyone else you'd like us to interview, please do so. If you're listening online, please leave a review. Let us know if you liked the episode and the other episodes. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll look forward to speaking to you all next time.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.